Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Matt Pippin Auletta, and we've got some work to do today, Matt. 2 games to review and 1 game to preview. Did you do your stretches and warm up? I know I always talk about our spring league, but you and I we're looking a little old sometimes. My hammy's tight, so we got to stretch before we get into it.
Luckily, I just sit here and I talk, so I think I'm ready.
Of course, I always say you got that lefty backhand dark magic. I never know what lefties are capable of. They don't stretch. I don't know what the deal is. So we're actually going to start, speaking of throwing a disc and I guess throwing quite a few backhands, we're going to start with the Boston game, which the Empire up in Boston came out as the victors 17-15. And I think the fun part of our conversation is certainly going to come on the defensive side of things for the Empire. But I think most importantly, where the changes and personnel questions were with all the players missing, with Elliott out, and again, players being rotated around and unavailable for that one. Sean Keegan, unfortunately, dealing with a little back injury here and waiting to get back healthy again. And again, personnel changes were coming. We just weren't sure what they were. And I think offensively, Matt, is where we have to begin talking about because, of course, it felt like these were the right choices after the fact. But if it doesn't go the Empire's way, then all of those decisions about Ethan on the O-line, Jeff Holm on the O-line for the first time in his career, those all become question marks.
As much as I kind of ripped into the coaching staff and kind of the laissez-faire attitude of the whole team in that Atlanta game, and credit to Atlanta, again, they played amazing. But as much as I was unhappy with the performance 2 weeks ago, they pulled all the right levers, put everybody in the right position, and then everybody rose to the occasion and they were like, hey, by the way, we are not dead yet. In fact, we're actually still very, very good. So, yeah, credit to Ethan. That was just like the little spark plug they needed. He was all over the place. He played amazing. One of the turns shouldn't even count because it was like a buzzer beater throw. I mean,
all three of them. Actually, all 3 of his...
All 3 were buzzer beaters? Okay.
He only had 3 throwaways in the game, and all 3 were end-of-quarter huck situations. Yep.
Yeah, so, I mean, basically a perfect game, exactly what the team needed, just all over the place. And I think it neutralized some of the poaching that former Empire player Ben Katz wanted to do. He didn't really... Some of the Empire's other players are a little more stationary on offense on occasion, so the poaching kind of gums things up a little bit. Ethan just ping-ponged all over the place when he really needed to. He pushed the pace, he won with his legs, and it just nullified some of the defensive things Boston was trying to do.
Yeah, I can't speak for him, but Ethan looked exhausted at the end of that game, and for good reason. He was working. He was using his frame to put himself between the defender and the disc over and over and over again. Really good body positioning, just putting on a clinic. And it should be noted, too, that it wasn't just Ethan and Saul as some kind of experiment. Remember, they have in the past at least played club together up in the Boston area, so they do know each other well. They understand the resets, and also Ethan's been with the team for years now and fully understands the offensive system. It's not like it was, a random player just jumping in and trying to learn everything on the fly. Ethan is also very good at breaking the mark, and that is important to especially what Boston were attempting to do by forcing things into middle. I was noticing quite a bit. Boston were trying, and obviously when you have Ben Katz, you're trying to do that. You're forcing the middle into those poaches and for them to just work around it. And then the other piece there was Jeff Holm, who is just very calm, very consistent. And I know he looks like that on his face, and that's his body language, calm, but it's one thing where you can look calm and your throws say that you're not calm, but both his throws were calm and his disposition is calm. Where does he do anything really special, miraculous, or does he really make a ton of offensive plays as a quote unquote big, the way even Lithio did last year? No, but he doesn't throw a lot of turnovers. He's just very consistent with the disc. And I talked to Anthony Nunez with a few different points here, and one of the things he brought up was that Jeff has been, being involved in the offense since the preseason as a potential offensive sub, and that was before Liam Haberfield was coming from New Zealand. So with his status, as in Liam's when his was still up in the air, Jeff was taking those reps because you didn't know if Sean Keegan was coming, came a little bit late to the team as well. So Holm was seen as one of those offensive options and subs. So yeah, it was that basically Anthony Nunez and Matt Cat Stevens and the brain trust and the captains, they went with the players that made the most sense. But also, again, it was a big personnel change by, on the other side of things, moving Liam Haberfield over to the D-line because, again, you don't have to do that. you can't just double down on on the idea and what you want to do and say, hey, we're gonna fight through this. But I actually think it's a bit of bravery to change things up and say that wasn't working. And against a team like Boston, that if you lose that game, you potentially lose inside track to hosting the playoffs. Or now you feel like you're fighting for third if Boston gets that game at their place. And who knows what will happen now next week on that Friday up in New York. And so to go out and get a win over Boston is huge for the standings too, as well.
Yeah, massive for the standings, and also just to show everybody that you are still the team or one of the teams to beat in the division. You're not just, you know, all of a sudden going to roll over because you had one bad game where there were issues in multiple facets. You said the exact name I was thinking, John Lithia. That is exactly the role Jeff Holm played. You know, big body, so defenders have to respect that. Nobody wants to get beat by a guy who's that big. You don't want to have to, outrun him, outjump him. But truly, he scored a bunch of really easy goals by pretty much standing still in the end zone and making space for other people. And then the throw went to him when it was needed, and the throws were great. So it was easy goals. And, finding the space like that is exactly what Lithia and sometimes Babbitt did in previous seasons. They just, you're so worried about them to a point, and then when you get near the end zone, everybody kind of gets tight. You don't want to give up the easy goal line score, and then you got a super big dude, easy target. Just here's the disc, here's a goal, amazing job. And I think I said this maybe like 2/3 of the way through last season during a deep point. Jeff Holmes also a pretty good thrower. I remember in one of the games he just like uncorked a deep throw, and I'm not seeing all the practices so when he did it, I was like, oh, that was a great throw. It's just another player who can really just step up and play and do good things. And again, like you said, he looked very calm with the disc, which is exactly what you want out of that type of player on your offense. And it was just another piece that they moved in the right place, and he performed really, really well.
And same thing for Ben Yacht in the other direction, where, of course, you and I both said where last week you said, well, it's got to be everybody. And for me, I was like, well, if Jack Williams, which I think he did against Montreal and Boston to a degree, and then with Yacht really ascending in level, 4 goals, 5 assists, just the one turn. And it is at this point, even after all these years, you still know Yacht on offense. I mean, what is it going to be with him with the disc in his hands? Is it going to be that kind of game, or is it going to be the game where every choice he makes is the right choice? He's just calm, cool, collected. And I think for me, while there aren't necessarily plays that stick out in that game to me with Ben Yacht, that again is a marker of how good he was. That it's just he just took over. He said, "All right, this is my game. I'm going to grind this out, and I'm going to be the guy who's going to attract all the attention, but I'm still going to get to the disc first." And that's going to leave me with the goals and the assists and all the counting stats, of course. But yeah, he played like a superstar, which is what you needed from that game.
He did. If a superstar could be understated, and like you said, I honestly don't even remember like one play where I was watching and thought, "Wow, amazing," or I'm going to watch that again. It was just very consistent, but at the highest level. I mean, that's somebody who was a 2-time MVP, and if his other teammates weren't also otherworldly, he'd probably be a 4-time MVP. So, yeah, I mean, he absolutely brought it, and it showed.
Now, on the other side of this, on defense against Boston, of course, I think there was a worry about not having John Randolph on defense. He's been, I think, the Empire's best defender in the beginning parts of the season, and does take an outside role, especially when the disc is turned over to get breaks. That is John Randolph, and he eats up space, and he's a great defender, and usually guards one of the best undercutters on the other team. So without him, what was going to happen? And one of the answers there was Liam Haberfield, who had, this is not an excuse, but it is true that he had just 3 practices with the Empire up to the Atlanta game, and he had two of them he wasn't healthy enough for to play in. So he played in 1 practice before the Atlanta game, and you and I have mentioned the issues with chemistry, and those were on full display. So not to say that he won't be back on offense, but it's the Empire used the same, and again, these are Anthony Nunez's words, but they use the same offensive principles for both offense and defense. So if anything, you got him more comfortable offensive reps while on defense, and takes a bit of the pressure off needing to be on offense and being on the break and things. And he also, I think, having shown up last season and playing for Atlanta, being the offensive threat that he was, I don't think people have really seen him defend and have to see him as a good defender. And he is a good defender. He had 2 blocks in the game. He jumped on a throwing mistake and then just had a fantastic point block. And I think Liam Haberfield is also a really good athlete, which again, you don't necessarily get to see fully offensively because he's known so much for his big throws. But the move for him on defense, it worked so well this weekend that you can really consider, are we going to just stick with that?
Yeah, and his big throws are very different than like the Ryan Osgard big throws, and I could see why initially the team would think to put him on offense. I mean, for many of the reasons you just said, and you're trying to find some of the magic from those throws that are now gone. Um, but he was also some of those throws, like you said, no chemistry yet, and they were a little risky. And those risks you can absolutely live with on defense. I mean, sometimes you see that from Marquez, Josue, so he can just fill in there, and you're getting a very good defender. You're getting somebody who can find holes against the other team's offense on a break opportunity. And, if the hook is a little too far and incomplete or something like that, like you can live with that on defense. The Empire offense, that's not really where you want to give that up as much. So until he like really is in sync with his offensive teammates, I think this switch also made a ton of sense. And he did have, I'm not sure which game it was, but he had one or two break throws where he just, 30-yard blade across the field, and it just like broke open the defense a little bit, and it let them just continue on. So I think temporarily, at least, it's a great fit.
Yeah, and especially against Boston, because obviously one of the strengths of the Empire offense last year was having Jeff Babbitt defensively to get the disc back and playing defense as an offense. And so for that Boston O to break them, you basically have to throw away from Jeff Babbitt. And I mean, again, if there was one defense that was prepared to do that, it was this defense that had worked with him in practices for years. And there are so many names to mention. And where I think that the coaching staff of the Empire will say deserve their plaudits and compliments for this game is for the defensive, we'll say, unit, the intensity all around from that defensive unit and the game plan that they went in with.
They brought it. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, but even the personnel decisions. You could have gone Antoine Davis against Jeff Babbitt, but instead they went Antoine Davis and Connor Russell on Johnson Go. And even though Johnson Go had good stats, but he also had a few bad stats, and there were a few mistakes, and Antoine got a D there. And so I think with all those different defensive players, even Shankalati, Axel Agami on Nathaniel Dick, forcing him into 3 turnovers. Marquez's length, you could tell, really bothered Sadok, because Sadok can break any mark. And the one kind of prototype player that can give him difficulty is a player like Marquez with that length. And then with Jeff Babbitt, it really was just all hands on deck. When it goes up, how many bodies can we put to him or get to him? And I think back to the Breton Tan D. And a funny thing is, Anthony let me know that Breton Tan was sick the last 2 weeks. He had trouble breathing. And yet, yes, I know Jeff dropped it more than Breton made the D. But, I mean, he put pressure on Jeff.
There was pressure, yeah.
That you don't usually get. But my shout out is a guy who made his season debut against Boston, and that is Callahan nominee from James Madison, Matt LeBar. Because you and I have known Matt LeBar since he was a teenager. Now, he was always taller than me, and probably you too, when he was with the Empire, but he was clearly a kid when we first met him, and now he looks like an adult. He looks like an adult man. His throws have gotten more consistent and better, and last season he covered Babbitt a ton in practices, and I thought he did an exceptional job, as good as anybody does on Babbitt. He was going to eat. That's what Jeff Babbitt does. He was going to get his stats. You knew that. But I think LeBar gave as much trouble to Babbitt as we have seen most players give Jeff Babbitt through the years.
Yeah. I mean, I think the team just approached the game in the right way. You know that some of the Boston players are going to put up some stats. It's okay. As long as you apply all the pressure consistently throughout the game, you will get opportunities, even if Jeff scores a bunch of goals or, Tyler Chan does a few amazing things. Like even when the players on Boston are not, I wouldn't even say most of them, they didn't even have bad game. The eventual compiling of too much pressure just resulted in a few miscues. And, Boston threw a few away, like in the reset space, or just kind of like uncontested. It wasn't even like Empire players were getting Ds on some of these. And if Boston cleans that up, I think they this game could have went right down to the wire. But, yeah, I think just in general, Empire really brought it. Everybody was way more locked in than they were previously, and it showed. The pressure mounted, and in the third quarter, there were a bunch of mistakes, and that was when they found a little separation. And
yeah,
Jeffrey did sky both draws pretty badly. Mike didn't go up for one, but I'm sure there's a picture of it from some angle that I would love to see where Michael just looked like a helpless child again. We always like to rag on him for those. And then he got Ryan really good. And, Ryan, after he gets up off the ground, you just see him laughing as he walks away from the play just because, got absolutely roofed and clobbered. And, what are you going to do?
I mean, Ryan did also have a pretty fantastic point block in that game as well. So,
well, yeah, that's a different play though. But yeah, you still got to laugh when Jeff just towers over you. And what are you going to do?
Oh, I wouldn't jump. I mean, I'm a coward. I kidding? I'm staying on the ground because I don't want to deal with the earthquake when he lands. I think the last talking point from here, and I think we're going to move into Montreal with this, is the hockey narrative. Because, of course, I think the Empire, talking to the coaching staff, they have their own opinion about how, we'll say, inflated the discussion about Hucks has become. The Empire were 0 for 3 on their Hucks, but as we already said, all 3 of those were on end of quarter situations, and all 3 of them were just Ethan trying to figure something out. So really, the Empire, in essence, were 0 for 0 on their Hucks because a number of long throws also aren't counted as Hucks because they didn't go far enough to yacht, but they're still like 30-yard throws or 25-yard throws that enter a different phase of the offense down the field. I think the question going forward is not to say that Boston isn't one of the elite teams. I think they are just right there in like that right number 2 category right now, and giving DC and the Empire all they can handle, of course, in these different games. So do you think moving forward as the season progresses that, almost purposely saying we're not a team that hucks, is the Empire offense good enough to say we're not going to put that in our quiver at all? We're actually just going to win the way that we beat DC in the playoffs last year. We're going to win the way that we just beat Boston. And hucking, yes, we'll take what we get if that's what the defense is forcing, but that is not something that's going to happen. And I don't want to jump ahead to the Philly preview, but we might have that answer that answered almost right away, because if Philly attempts to make it again, of course it'll be Philly offense, but I mean, it might, right? Like if Philly has a plan to try to force the Empire to make this a game in the air, I'm interested to see how they respond to that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't know what the numbers are. I would have to look it up, but I'm curious to know what throws counted as hucks the last 2 seasons for the Empire, because yeah, there's a lot of dynamic throws that maybe pass the 40-yard mark and are registered as like hucks, but there was also a lot that aren't, and they're just as impressive because they're sky-high blades, like with pinpoint accuracy, which obviously they're gone. Oscar's not currently playing, but I wouldn't have said they were like a huck-heavy team last year even. I mean, I'm sure that some of those throws count as hucks, but like to me, they weren't somebody standing and launching like 50, 60-yard throws that a receiver is like running out. It was more, they were just dropping throws exactly where they needed to go to receivers that had like already made space. So it's a little different. I mean, like I said, I'd be curious to see what the numbers actually look like, but yeah, they haven't really felt like a huck heavy team to me. So I don't know. I think probably not. I don't think they're a huck heavy team still, even if the numbers will show even this year. I think they just find the space they need, and they're all comfortable kind of waiting until they can find the right spaces to attack. And they're all too good. They get under open and in space enough that they don't need to just launch things deep. And I think that might be, as we talked about, a reason why you don't need Haberfield on offense currently. It's like, I feel like he wanted to bomb it, and they don't really need that. They can make the space for the mid-range throws, which may or may not technically count as hucks.
Hey Ryan, have you ever thought to yourself how you could fit everything you need for one weekend into a single bag?
And there's an incredible layout block.
Oh, there's a Callahan. Mike Dross did it for New York.
From cleats to jerseys to discs, pennies, water bottles, the greatest bag can help.
And this is going to be a greatest here.
This is going to be a Callahan for Ryan Drost.
Thanks to Greatest Bag for being a sponsor of the New York Empire.
I'm interested to see if there is a defense coming up in this schedule that can force them to be more unnatural with that and to put them in a position where they feel like they have to do that, which Montreal did not do, because let's go quick on this one. Unfortunately, by that time, the O-line was running out of physical bodies. Matt LeBar also played a bunch of O points as well against Boston. It was really important, consistent on his throws, but he had his hand stepped on, so they lost by the end of that game. You were just throwing bodies on O-line to see who was healthy. Some fun storylines due to a bunch of players leaving for weddings even after Boston. National team training camp for Antoine. Bobby Elston, Sam Alston injured. Oscar Kohut injured. Angelo Olchese injured. So the two fun stories here. Scott Shue was called up, not even called up as in from any practice, and then like literally on the phone, bring. Hey Scott, remember that championship you won the Empire? Can you help us out this weekend? And Scott jumped in and got a D, a block on
Where was
DeCrone, and
my
also
phone call?
I think they go backwards in time. So if they get the nose from the 2020s
All right.
players, then you and CJ Willett will start to get your phone calls once they get to 19. And then I
don't think I would have wanted to try and play defense in those windy conditions. That's fine. Maybe it's best if I don't get the call.
Well, I mean, it's so smart though, because good plug, because tonight, or not tonight, but on Friday night, it's alumni night where a certain Bo Kittredge is having his jersey honored. So I think your number is right next to Bo Kittredge's on the
all-time greats.
So, yeah, of course, right. So right, so Bo Kittredge will be honored. His jersey will be being honored at and we'll see him on Friday night. So against Montreal, though, again, so Scott Shue is out there on D-line, and then Vedant Shadeva on the roster and practicing for the first time in the week. He played for Chicago last year. First practice on Wednesday, throwing out there on the D-line. Ben Levy makes his Empire debut. So just a lot of different bodies and faces, and it was all hands on deck. But it was just a good strategy. And Coach Nunez said that, the idea for DeCrone was a similar thing about Babbitt. So the idea is it's a Jeff Babbitt treatment, even though, again, it's not Jeff Babbitt, but it's a Jeff Babbitt treatment. As in, make that guy beat you as a thrower, let him touch the disc as much as he possibly wants. And he did. He put up some crazy throwing numbers, fantastic throwing numbers. But the Empire won. Yes, they won by 2, 18-16. But as you and I were speaking beforehand, it was really never close. The Empire had that one in hand. They had control of the game. And I think it's a different kind of impressive from the Boston win, right? The Boston win was impressive. Good win for the Empire. But Montreal's still also could have been a loss if things don't go their way, but they controlled the whole game and they had a good game plan with whoever was available.
Yeah, it was nice to see that everybody was just kind of shifting, playing wherever they needed, and they really had that game wrapped up pretty early. It never felt close. I mean, at the end, like you said, the score kind of ticked away a little bit, but they're just it wasn't close. They were in control. And yeah, it was windy. There were a lot of mistakes, and they just kind of played through it all, and they showed they were the better team there.
Oh, yes. In particular for Montreal, I want to say Charles Weinberg, Jack Williams, and Oliver Chartok. Again, in those conditions, those three, as they do, just grinding for every yard. And if those guys don't play as controlled as they did within themselves, then the Empire O-line doesn't look as seamless as it was with all those bodies missing.
Yeah. For anyone who watched the Montreal stream, the clock issues were all over the place. It was jumping between an hour left, 5 minutes left, 1 minute left, 1 minute 15, 1:14, and then sometimes there was no graphic at all, and it was a little hard to watch. And they're a pretty good organization, so hopefully whoever was controlling that maybe can get some reps at practice, like simulating a game. I do really like, even though I don't understand French, the simul language broadcast. I think that's a fun niche thing. But yeah, the actual on-screen product was a little lacking. It was a little hard to follow at times, especially with a bunch of new Empire players getting plugged in. Mm-hmm. I was all over the place.
Yeah, I was sitting on the roster trying to figure out, okay, who's wearing this number? And of course, Scott being helpful with the headband and the number 22 returning and all that stuff. Now, speaking of returning, the Philadelphia Phoenix have returned most of their team from last season. Now, Alex Thorne will be out this weekend, or Friday night, but they, again, have played in how else can you say other than they are the hot birds and the cold birds this season? The first 2 games offensively scoring 20 total goals in the first 2 weeks, and then going to double overtime, 23-22 loss to DC at DC, everything they possibly could. James Pollard really putting on a superstar performance. So if you're the Empire, you have no idea. Are you going to get the hottest of hot birds, or are you going to get the team from the first 2 games of their season? And I think that makes preparing for Philadelphia just so challenging, because we could go next week and say, wow, the Empire, clearly a different class as Philly, beat the pants off them. Or we could say, goodness gracious, Philly either made them sweat, or what is still on the line too is that the Empire have not lost since June 23rd, 2018, a 23-22 loss to Montreal, which I know you remember for pretty explicit reasons. And, so that's the last home loss for the Empire. And so that's still on the line. I know the 31-game unbeaten streak is broken, but they're still protecting Joseph Efesina Field.
Somebody has to get thrown out protecting a Drost from Canadian taunting. I volunteer 100% of the time for that. Philly, and if I'm Empire, or just as a fan watching these games now, I'm not really that concerned about Philly. Somehow it seems that Philly has figured out how to play against DC better. Like that's the code they've cracked a little bit. It seems like they've been putting up some pretty good performances against them for whatever reason, even though, I would say Empire, DC, both, the class of the division the last few years, but for whatever reason, the personnel or the matchups or just the way it all shakes out, I feel like Empire has an easier go against Philly. So I'm not too concerned. I hope Michael gets a block at home on alumni night. That would be the way to do it. We talked about a few weeks ago, would those blocks come earlier? And we thought they would, but just the way it's all shaken out and the split between, most of the non-offensive players are getting almost equal reps in these games on defense. Pretty much everybody else is playing like 9, 10, 11 points. So, the opportunities have been a little lower, and be a cool time to see it.
Well, that is the big headline. So alumni night on Friday night, 7 p.m., Joseph Efesina Field against Philadelphia. Mike Dross, 199 on the verge. And Ryan's trying to leave everybody in the dust. He's now at 204, number 1 all time, just trying to continue to push that higher and higher. So I don't think there's much else to talk about, because by the time you hear this, Philly will likely already be on their buses or in their cars and on their way up to New York. So for Matt and myself, I appreciate the Empire got back on track. They're 3-1. Heading to take on Philadelphia this week. And I think, again, the idea of the Empire has fallen is just a bit premature, right?
Oh, yeah, big time. I didn't think the whole season was going to fall apart just because of one bad game. I think if they had played like that again, you maybe worry about the coaching decisions, the strategy, the drive after being so great for so long. But no, they were having none of that. They beat Boston soundly. They looked like they really wanted it, and they wanted to prove a point, and they weren't even at full strength. So, the sky is still the limit for the team.
Yep. Again, 7 p.m. on Friday night. So we'll see you there.